All right. Hey everyone. Kinji here from Collective Shift, and I am just going to wait a couple minutes just to let some people join if they are running behind schedule. But today we're going to be talking about Dune Analytics and giving kind of a workshop overview of what that is. So just bear with me one moment. All right, perfect. I think it's good enough to get started now. Also, just a reminder that all of these workshops are recorded and they are put on the member platform. So if you do miss it or you have to run, don't worry, you're not going to be missing out on any content. We'll have that up for you, and you can kind of watch it in your own time should you choose. So let's just dive right into it. So today I'm doing a workshop on Dune Analytics. Dune Analytics is a very popular tool. Sorry, one moment. Let me jump back. There we go. Dune Analytics is a very popular data tool that's used throughout crypto. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how Collective Shift makes investments, and more importantly, how we leverage Dune to help us make better crypto investments. So that's really the goal of this workshop here. The reason that I've chosen to do it that way is because we already have a great resource on how to use Dune. Just kind of giving a high level overview of the platform, so members can reference that. And I'll when I post this to the member platform, I'll provide a link to that as well. And then Dune on their own, so also provides very good technical walkthroughs for people who want to build their own dashboards, build their own Dune queries. They have really good resources for that, which I'll also link for members interested in that. Now, the one gap in that information is, how do you actually leverage Dune and use it to make investments? So, we give the intro. There's resources out there to understand the technicals, and we're trying to fill this gap right now of, how do I actually use it as a member to make an investment? And so that's what I'm going to cover today. So I made these presentation slides that'll kind of help facilitate my thoughts and communicate the ideas that I'm trying to get out there. So bear with me as I run through this, because this will be the first time going through. But the presentation is structured as follows. So I'll do a quick introduction, or I did an introduction, and then we're going to talk about the Collective Shift investment process, and just kind of how we think of investments, and then where Dune sits within that. Then I'm going to cover kind of utilizing Dune for basic due diligence, and that's really getting into the meat of how we use Dune, why we use Dune, and our best practices. And then I'm going to end with just a brief overview of the technicals. So I mentioned I didn't want to dive too deep into them, but I do think it's important that members know, where's this data coming from? How do they get it? How do you access it? I'll just do a really brief touch on that. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have some times to go over any questions. So as I am going through the presentation, please do drop any questions that you may have in the live chat. At the end, I think we should have maybe 5 minutes left over, and I can answer any questions that we have there. So let's dive into it. So we're going to start with the Collective Shift investment process, or really what we kind of call the investment pipeline. And so these are the different stages and kind of the different decision-making points that we go through when making a new crypto investment. And so it starts off with project discovery, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. We put out those videos, which are really great. And really what we're looking for in project discovery is an idea and a concept. So, analyzing, do we agree with that idea? Do we agree with this protocol's, their plan of action, their vision for the future, and kind of the opportunity or the problem that they're looking to solve? Do we agree that that is an important problem to solve, or we share that vision of the future? And so that's kind of the idea standpoint. Then we also look at the team and the community. Are these people trustworthy? Do we believe in them? Does this community excite us? Does it have energy? Things like that. And so if we love the idea, we love the community, then we'll move into what we call fundamental analysis. And so fundamental analysis, I think the easiest way to describe how we look at it at Collective Shift is it's just it's just gathering as much information as you can in order to make a more informed investment decision. And I think you can dive even a bit deeper into that, into it's gathering information to challenge any assumptions that you have in that you need, or how do I, let me rewind. It in any idea that we are looking for. So if we believe in a shared future, this future idea that this protocol is describing, there are assumptions in place that have to be true in order for that idea to become real. And so within fundamental analysis, part of that is pulling data from Dune in order to validate those assumptions. So hopefully that made sense. But really, I'm gonna get back to the core point that I said before, which is it's just gathering as much information as possible to make a more informed investment decision. And so we like to do that both at a protocol level, if available, and then also at a market level and industry level. So those are the first two steps in the investment process. If we get past that, then we're looking at more of a valuation. So looking at tokenomics, do we believe that this token or this NFT that we're buying, does it have the possibility and the tokenomic structure to accrue value over time, assuming the protocol is doing well. And then we'll also look at some comparable companies and make sure that the price that we're paying for this token is reasonable when compared to the market and other protocols. And then lastly, if we're happy with everything we've done up to that point, we're excited about it, then we'll make an investment, and it's really just a decision of allocation, which kind of just depends on your circumstances, your risk tolerance, and your portfolio. But bringing it back to Dune now, Dune Analytics really sits in this fundamental analysis area. So we primarily use Dune to go out and collect data, or Dune actually collects most of the data for us, and then we're able to look at the data, analyze the data, make some tweaks to the data, and ultimately gather that information that we need in order to make a sound investment, or in order to make sure that the investment that we're making is fits within our risk profile. It's a reasonable idea, kind of all of those things. And so I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into what do we mean by fundamental analysis. And at Collective Shift, we break it into three main parts. Two of which kind of are tied together. So the first is just protocol fundamentals. So with protocol fundamentals, you're looking for data specific to a protocol and kind of getting that data in order to prop up the assumptions of the protocol. So what I mean by that is obviously if you have a company, you want to have user growth. So you might use Dune to look for user growth. You also obviously want, or not obviously, but you might want total value locked growth. That's another area that Dune can help out with. And then there's also protocol specific kind of metrics that you might want to look at. For example, if you're looking at a DEX, you're going to want to see a lot of trade volume, a lot of unique traders, and deep liquidity depth. So that's kind of more specific to a protocol. Following protocol fundamentals, we have vertical fundamentals and ecosystem fundamentals. So, and those kind of sit within market fundamentals in our mind. So we view vertical fundamentals really as like an industry. So looking at a specific niche within crypto and analyzing, is this a growing market? Is this industry delivering value in the way that it's meant to? Because you don't want to make an investment into a dying industry or an industry that isn't growing. So there, in vertical fundamentals, we look at things like user growth and then more industry specific metrics, which we could talk about later. The last one is ecosystem fundamentals. And what we mean by ecosystem fundamentals is really thinking about kind of layer ones and layer twos, and layer ones, layer twos, other blockchains, things of that nature. Because if you're making an investment into a protocol, you are therefore also making an investment into that ecosystem, right? If I invest in something on, let's say, Optimism, and me making an investment into a protocol on Optimism is also an assumption that Optimism itself will be successful. If Optimism fails, that protocol is destined to fail too. And so that's why we also want to look at ecosystem fundamentals. Just kind of a note on that, it's not something that we view as you having to do every single time you make an investment. It's more if you're making an investment into a new ecosystem that you've never used before, never deployed capital in before, you probably want to look at the fundamentals of that ecosystem to make sure that it can support the growth of the protocol you're investing in. So there's no need to do that every single day or every single investment. You've probably already looked at the ecosystem enough if you're thinking of investing there. But other than that, it is important to keep an eye on when making investments. So that kind of went through the Collective Shift investment process, kind of outlining how we make investments, and more importantly, setting up the stage to understanding, why Dune, how's Dune important, and where that fits in. So as I mentioned, it fits in to the fundamental analysis area. So before I jump into kind of how we use Dune specifically for fundamental analysis, I do want to quickly jump to the Dune homepage just to give everyone an overview and make sure they're up to speed with what is Dune. So if we jump here, we have the Dune Analytics homepage, which is fantastic, nice little thing. And what we can do is look for dashboards that other people have created, or we can create one ourselves. That display metrics surrounding an ecosystem, a protocol, a vertical, all those things that I recently mentioned. So let's see if there's any here that look particularly interesting. So the OpenSea one, here's a good example, is this tracks OpenSea data. So we can see here we have OpenSea monthly volume, daily volume, and some other data points, and it's broken down between Ethereum and Polygon. So this is kind of the type of dashboards that you typically look at on Dune. If you're looking for something very specific, all you have to do is go up to the search bar in the top left and type in whatever it is you're looking for. So let's say we want to do some analysis on LooksRare. All you have to do is type in looks or a keyword, hit enter, and we will see if my internet holds up for this. Last time I did this, it took a couple minutes, so bear with me. There we go. And then here we have a bunch of different dashboards that people have created related to our keyword, which is looks. And over on the right, we have stars, and that's basically favorites and upvotes. And you can see how many times a dashboard's been favorited or upvoted. And basically that helps you decide, which ones are of the highest quality. So if we click into here, we can see just another example of a Dune dashboard and how it is being created. At the end, I'll get into just a tiny bit of making our own queries, but we will get to that later. Don't worry. So now I want to jump into, how at Collective Shift, how are we using Dune? And so I mentioned, we use it for fundamental analysis, and I mentioned our fundamental analysis encompasses ecosystem fundamentals, vertical fundamentals, and protocol fundamentals. And so the way that I've structured kind of this core part of this presentation is I made very small case studies looking at each of these different segments. So the ecosystem, vertical, and protocol, and I'll quickly run through all of them. I'm going to keep it fairly high level. The reason being is that particularly for vertical and protocol fundamental analysis, you're looking for different things depending on the protocol and the vertical, right? There's not a set list of metrics that you really want to find on your own. There's not a set list of metrics that you're going to use every single time. It's going to vary depending on the protocol, depending on the market. So I don't want to spend too much time kind of hammering home something that's not obviously transferable. Instead, what hopefully everyone takes away from this is just kind of understanding how we approach things and how we're thinking through this data collection really to help us make better decisions. And so we'll start with the ecosystem fundamentals. And the case study that I made for this is OptiPunks or Optimism Punks, which is a CryptoPunks derivative on optimism. Just disclosure, we're not involved with it at all. I don't believe any of our team holds any OptiPunks. It's just kind of purely made for this demonstration. But let's say that we're thinking about buying an OptiPunk Collective Shift, and it's going to be our first investment onto the Optimism network. What type of things do we want to look at in order to justify that investment or make sure we have enough data to make that investment? And then how can we use Dune to collect that data and validate those assumptions? And so we'll start out with things that I would want to look at if we're going to make that investment. And the first thing I want to see is just adoption. Is, Optimism a growing network? Is it does the network have enough activity to make me confident that it's not going to disappear? And therefore, if Optimism disappears, the value of my OptiPunk also disappears because it exists on that network. So I want to make sure that isn't going to happen. I'm also kind of interested in the use cases that are going on in Optimism. The reason being, I want to know, does my investment fit in with kind of the, how should I say, the ethos of that network, or the use cases on that network, right? If there's a specific use case, is my investment sitting outside of that use case? Is it a part of that use case? Does it leverage that use case to do something else? How do I fit into this ecosystem? And then the last thing, and I would say arguably the most important thing when entering a new a new ecosystem, is looking at the infrastructure. And so this is something you can get from Dune, but you could also get from your own Googling and research. But is there infrastructure to support, or that is there critical infrastructure that's needed to support your investment? And what I mean by that is, let's say I want to buy an OptiPunk, but I want to flip it in 2 weeks, right? Like I think there's going to be a lot of hype around it. I'm not trying to hold it forever. I think in 2 weeks this is going to go up, and I'm trying to get out after the 2 weeks. Well, that is only possible if there is a thriving NFT marketplace on Optimism. If there's no way for me to sell my punk, then I can't do a flipping strategy. So it's really important to make sure that there is infrastructure on that ecosystem in order to support whatever your investment is and investment strategy. And so now I'm going to kind of show how we can use Dune in order to kind of but explore these areas that I briefly mentioned we wanted to explore. So let's start with adoption. So here we have a couple metrics on adoption. There's a bunch of metrics here on this Dune dashboard, but we're going to start with the adoption area. So here we have total transactions per day. We can see that it's basically been bouncing in between 50,000 and 30,000, I'd say, per day, and it's been going like that consistently. So that's it's not a huge amount of volume, right? It's nothing compared to Ethereum, but it definitely is not, what should I say? It's not something that it's not insignificant volume. So that's nice to see. I would be slightly concerned that it doesn't appear, there isn't very obvious growth right now. It's relatively flat, which would be something I'd want to explore a little bit more. A way that I might explore this is that I don't really like that the output is by day, but instead I might want to break it into larger time frames and look at it by month perhaps, and maybe we'll get a better growth metric. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to fork things later, but as you can see, if you click into the I'm not sure what we'll call it the header for the box. Then you can see the actual query written in SQL, see the visualization, and then also, I'll show later, you can fork them as well to make your own query. So that's something that I might be interested in. Luckily, over here on the right, we can see that there actually has been some growth, particularly in unique users over time. So normally, I'm not a huge fan of cumulative metrics because they're vanity metrics, right? A cumulative metric can never go down. So the total users over time can never decrease. So it doesn't give a clear picture of growth, in my opinion. However, we can see that this graph is pretty much up and to the right. It started, decreasing in slope, therefore decreasing in growth a little bit later, but it still is, fairly steep, I would say. And you can definitely see that it's growing, that there's activity, and I would feel somewhat confident that this isn't just a blip, this isn't going to disappear tomorrow, and therefore the value of my investment. But it is something to keep track of how much activity is there, because it might affect your risk tolerance and how risky you view the investment. Next, I mentioned that we wanted to look at things like use cases. What's the primary use case on this ecosystem, and does my investment fit into that use case at all? What we can see here is that it's primarily trading on Optimism, and we can see that through Perpetual Protocol, Uniswap, Synthetics, Hot Protocols, a bridge, and we can see over here, protocol, most used protocol per day, it's dominated by Perpetual and Uniswap. So we can see the primary use case is trading. Does the OptiPunk fit into that use case or leverage that use case? Not really. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. Before I move on to the TVL, the last thing I wanted to point out is that most of these are interactive, or they're pretty much all interactive. So you can see this is most used protocols per day, and you can click out of it and kind of, get a deeper look at. So let's get rid of perpetual, Uniswap, and synthetics, which are the top three. And now we can see, actually how tiny of market share some of these smaller protocols have on Optimism. So just, I just want to point out that how you can use Dune a little bit better. Last thing I want to talk about is TVL over time. So this kind of jumps into, how should I say, kind of the adoption metric again, right? Are there more and more funds being built up on this layer 2? If there are, the more capital that's there, the more invested people are in it. And as we can see, they had a very large jump right here, but that is primarily stemming from an increase in SNX. So if we get rid of that, get rid of the SNX, I'm not quite sure why the SNX jumped, but that's something that'd be interesting to explore. We can see some pretty stable TVL growth up to about 300 million, excluding SNX. Including SNX, we're getting into maybe the 500 million range. So that's good to see. If we're looking to buy a token on Optimism, what we primarily, this might be data that we're interested in because it's the transaction fees the network is collecting, and really, if you're buying a token, that's how a network gets revenue. Okay, so I'm gonna jump back to the slides so to kind of give a brief overview. So in that situation, we can look at Dune to see that there's some activity going on the ecosystem. We can look at the primary use cases to understand, does that hurt or benefit our own investment or what we're looking to invest in? And then lastly, infrastructure. So when I was looking at the different protocols that were used, I didn't see any major NFT exchange. So that might be something that's important. That might be something that is important to keep in mind if you're looking to flip this NFT. That might not be possible. So that's basically kind of what I wanted to cover there. Hopefully that gave a good overview of how you can use Dune to dive into those ecosystem fundamentals. And we can move on now to the vertical fundamentals. So I'm going to breeze through the vertical fundamentals and the protocol fundamentals. I kind of already mentioned that earlier because they're so very similar. Also, the basic mindset and thought process is rather similar to ecosystem fundamentals. So primarily the way that I think people extract value from this portion of the presentation is getting to see a little bit of how we're thinking, and also just seeing what other type of Dune dashboards there are out there for members to use. So we'll hop right into vertical fundamentals. So a vertical fundamental is, or vertical fundamentals is once again basically looking at different industries or different niches within crypto to see how they're growing, and making sure that you are investing in an industry or in a vertical that has a large enough market size and is growing at a strong enough rate to support the growth of whatever you're investing in. So in this hypothetical situation, we're going to be looking at the hypothetically Collective Shift is going to make an investment in a new DEX aggregator. This isn't true. This is just a pure hypothetical. But if we were to do that, what are some things we'd want to look at? So once again, we'd obviously want to look at adoption, make sure that, the DEX aggregators and DEXs themselves are growing, right? Because if there's no transactions happening on a DEX, then there's no need for a DEX aggregator. This is a good opportunity to look at competition. What major competitors are out there, and how much of the market share do they own? Is it something where there's like a differentiated product that it seems that's really dominating the market, or is everyone kind of sharing the market equally? And maybe if we go in with really good rewards, like token rewards, maybe we can suck away some market share. Then the last thing that I would also look at here is what I call black swan events. So when you're looking at a dashboard or some data on Dune, a lot of the times you're going to see kind of like a steep spike in activity or a steep drop in activity, or basically an outlier in the data. And I think it's really important when you see those to try to understand what caused that outlier. Because if it's showing up in the data, that means it's affecting the protocol or the industry that you're investing in. So keeping an eye out for that is important, because it might represent maybe a temporary exploit, a temporary state of the ecosystem, or a state of the protocol that you might want to check out. Or it could represent kind of a huge shift, fundamental shift in the way that vertical is operating, or the way that protocol is operating. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. So I'll hop into some Dune dashboards that'll showcase some of these. So we'll start with, I believe it's adoption of DEXs. So here I have a Dune DEX dashboard. And what we have here, or where I'm going to start, is monthly DEX volume by project. So if we're investing in a DEX aggregator, we want to make sure that DEX volume is also increasing. And so what we can see here is that there has been some nice increase in DEX activity over the past year. I don't think that's surprising to anyone, but it's nice to just kind of make sure and verify that that is the case. And we can see, some small drop-offs. We can also see that Uniswap is obviously the dominant player amongst DEXs. Something that I do want to point out is that it looks like, wow, there's been a steep drop-off in February, but that isn't really the case. That's just because February isn't done yet. We're only about halfway through. So this number will grow as the month continues, and just something to keep in mind when you're looking at dashboards. Now, I also want to point out, going back to kind of the black swan mention, that to look out for outliers. So to me, when I look at this, I see kind of like a natural trend line here, right? You could almost draw a straight line from this point all the way up to this point and see everything kind of following that line, with the exception of May. So in May, to me, that looks like a clear outlier. And so that's something that I would want to explore personally. And what happens is, if you look, this is May 2021. So that's briefly after the Coinbase IPO. And that's when we had that huge dump. A lot of people exited crypto. And so you could kind of almost verify people were selling into stable assets or just exiting crypto altogether based on this huge uptick in DEX activity. So that's kind of what I mean by looking out for black swan events like that. And so you can see kind of a break from the trend, something irregular. Let's figure out what happened, and is that important to know? So yeah, so that's kind of, making sure there's adoption. Another thing you could look at up here is aggregator share of DEX volume. So seeing, DEXs take up roughly, I'd say 20 to 30% of all DEX transaction volume, which means there is room to grow, right? So if you're building a DEX, there is a lot of opportunity for you to take over some market share from something like Uniswap. But that's obviously going to be a big undertaking. So this is another example of a Dune dashboard that could help you get comfortable with understanding how much is an industry growing, how much is a vertical growing, who are the major players in that vertical. We can see Uniswap. Here we have the aggregators, 1inch, Matcha, Gnosis, Paraswap, and kind of gathering more information about the health and the makeup of this particular vertical. So I talked about adoption, talked about black swan events. I'm gonna briefly run over competition. So here's kind of a way that you could look at market share within the DEX aggregators and kind of identify and come to not conclusions, but find new areas to explore or data to collect, I should say, or ideas to ponder. Why not? So here we have all DEX aggregators, volume share daily. So the percentage of volume through DEX aggregators, what percentage do they have? And so what we can see here is that 1inch dominates on volume percentage, dominates in terms of volume. Most days it's over 50% of the share. We can see 69.5%, 62%. It's definitely the leader when it comes to volume. But it's interesting that when you go down to swap shares daily, that it doesn't have the same distribution. You have OX actually has pretty equal distribution to 1inch in terms of transaction count versus transaction volume. And so what that really demonstrates is that somehow 1inch has gotten really good at collecting or at capturing high volume transactions. And on the flip side, OX has become really good at capturing low volume transactions, because you can see they barely have, they're the orange, they're not that large of market share by volume, but very large by transaction swaps. So that's kind of an area where you'd see something like that and you would want to explore that a little bit more, try to understand, okay, well, how is 1inch getting so much volume? How is OX getting so much transaction count? And then also kind of something that's interesting is none of the other players are really growing or shrinking in market share. Primarily, it's more important that they're not growing, which to me indicates that if you enter this space, you can't just enter it and immediately hope to gain traction. You kind of have to make a differentiated product. And so if I were to be investing in a new DEX, I would want to know, well, how are you going to compete with a 1-inch and OX over the long term, assuming I'm making a long-term investment. So that kind of covers that. I think, I've gone over these things, and we can move on to protocol fundamentals now. So protocol fundamentals is the last part of fundamental analysis that we do here at Collective Shift. It's also the last part of, or the last area where Dune really adds a lot of value in terms of how we go through this. And so I'm going to just touch on it really briefly. As I mentioned, it's not a like a one size fits all approach. You're going to have to vary this approach constantly depending on what the protocol is that you're investing in, right? Each protocol is going to have their own different key metric that you will have to figure out and evaluate through Dune. So I'm just going to run through this really quick. So basically, we're looking at the very, very similar things to an industry. So when we're doing that industry fundamental analysis, these are essentially the same things that we're going to look for on a protocol fundamental level. But instead of zooming out and looking at the entire industry, we're now going to zoom in and look solely at the protocol. And so we're looking for the same things: adoption, key metrics, and black swan events. I'll just show this as another example of what Dune can look like, is zkSync. And so here we have a nice zkSync dashboard. We can see some cumulative transactions from ETH mainnet. We can see TVL is growing. And then we can also break down into how much are people actually depositing into zkSync. So the only real thing that I found kind of interesting, and it's kind of not related, but still fun, is that zkSync, we can see there's really steep growth right here. Like there's really steep growth, pretty exponential growth from August up till about December of 2021. And, it's grown really fast. And then you can see it tapers off here. People have stopped transacting from the ETH mainnet to zkSync, which shows it's not growing nearly as fast, but it had this really interesting area where it grew very quickly. And so my personal hypothesis as to why that is looking at all of this deposit by ETH amount. 77% of all the deposits have been 0.1 ETH or less, which to me suggests that no one's depositing to actually deploy their capital and use it on optimism, right? They're doing something else with it, because I think 0.1 ETH, especially during that time frame, you would have paid a lot in gas fees to get it over there. So what I think is that during this time, we had a lot of airdrops, and people were getting hyped up about layer 2s doing token releases. And I think a lot of people were just hunting for airdrops, putting a tiny bit of ETH into zkSync, hoping for that retrospective airdrop. So yeah, that's kind of not directly related to investments, but another interesting way and kind of examples of insights you can pull from Dune from the dashboards. If we're to go back to the investment ideas, it is good to see that growth, even if it might just be airdrop hunting. And then also the TVL has been growing pretty steadily. And we can see here, I think this is deposit versus withdrawal. Net wise, more people are depositing into zkSync than they are taking out. So, it is slowly accumulating some of that TVL, or actually it's accumulating it pretty fast. So that's something that you'd be interested in. All right. So as I mentioned, I didn't want to touch on that for too long, given it'd be repeating a lot of information from the past two. Just checking to see how I'm doing on time. Oh, doing pretty well, doing really well actually. So let's see, I'm gonna jump back here really quick. So that is kind of how we at Collective Shift use Dune Analytics. It is primarily to support our fundamental analysis and pull or discover, find, and analyze data and collect as much data and information as possible to help us make more informed decisions when we are investing. Actually, something that I do want to bring up that I forgot to, I wanted to bring it up earlier, is that within crypto investing, there are very few times where you're going to be getting all of the information that you desire before making an investment. It's just kind of the nature of the industry. There's a lot of information asymmetry out there. And ultimately that lack of, or the lack of regulatory disclosures that you have to make, or the lack of just public information, particularly as a retail investor, means that you're not going to have all the information, and that's kind of what makes this such a high risk, high reward industry. So something I want to point out is like, yes, these are all the protocol fundamentals, vertical fundamentals, ecosystem fundamentals. That is ideally what we want to grab and how we want to analyze a protocol. But we understand that we're not going to have that information for every single investment. But if you don't have that information, it's important to understand that you have these blind spots then, and therefore that kind of increases the risk that you're taking with the investment, because there is more unknown. You can't validate those assumptions that you're making that are required for a protocol to flourish. So that's just something I wanted to bring up. It's less about pulling data, or you want to pull data to make a more informed investment decision. If you can't pull that data, that doesn't mean don't make the investment. That doesn't mean, oh no, like Collective Shift, I can't use the process that Collective Shift uses. It's more about understanding that you have those blind spots now, and that there is some more risk to that investment. So that's something that I just wanted to touch on. But when possible, I really encourage everyone to try to at least do a little bit of fundamental analysis, looking at the protocol, the vertical, and the ecosystem. All right, so that is the end of utilizing Dune for basic due diligence. The last thing that I want to touch on is a brief overview of technicals. I mentioned this is going to be pretty quick. The reason it's going to be pretty quick is I don't think a lot of our members are looking to build out their own Dune dashboards. And another reason that it's going to be pretty quick is that Dune has really good resources for this on their own. And when I post this workshop on the member platform, I'll be sure to provide links to the resource that we've already made, as well as some of the resources that Dune already has. So, but it's important to touch on these very quickly. So I think if you're using Dune, these are the type of questions you'd want to know. At least this is what I wanted to know. So the main one is, how does Dune actually collect data? Where is this data coming from? Are they, do they have like a bunch of guys in the back just inputting it into Excel, or, how does it work? And so the way it works is Dune is collecting and parsing data directly from blockchains, and then converting the data that they collect into data tables that make it easy for people to query. By putting it in a data table, it basically makes it very easy for people like us to pull that data and analyze that data. And so the data collected is the same data that appears in logs of transactions found on block explorers. So I have an example of that, and I think that'll help people understand. So here I've just gone to a random transaction on Etherscan. I have literally no idea what this is, but here, it's something to do with Olympus DAO. But here we have kind of like the typical transaction page that I'm sure we're all used to seeing if we've been using MetaMask and kind of the block explorers to make sure our transactions go through. So here we have the overview tab, internal transactions, logs, state, and comments. So logs is the data that Dune is pulling. So what we have here is these are all of the functions that I think this is it. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure these are the functions in the contract that were called that lead to a data output. So we see here we have what's called data, and we'll put it into hex format, and we can see this is just some kind of string basically that is not very human friendly. I can't understand what that data means. And so what Dune does is they go in, they start tracking a contract. Anytime a contract has an event or puts out data like this, they take this hash, we'll call it, and they translate that into human readable data. And then they put that in a data table for us to query. We'll see a little bit more about what that means, but basically they're pulling data directly from chain, and the data that they're pulling is basically this data and then converting it into a human readable format. All right. Oops. Okay. And so that's where the data comes from. And currently they support contracts on Ethereum, Polygon, Optimism, Binance Smart Chain, and Solana is currently in beta. So those are the chains that you can use Dune for. The next question that I normally have is like, how do you create your own dashboards? How do you create your own queries? And so basically all you need is a free Dune account. And once you have a Dune account, you can write your own SQL queries using kind of the Dune webpage, and I'll show a little bit of that. So you can just hit new query, it'll take you to a page, you could write the query, execute the query. I'll show that briefly, but you can also fork existing queries to meet your own requirements. I think that's really valuable because most of the time, or I'd say 9 times out of 10 when I'm looking for data, someone's already made a Dune dashboard for it. And so rather than building the whole thing from scratch, a lot of times I just fork the query and make very small adjustments to get the data that I'm specifically looking for. Or maybe I just don't like the way they're presenting data, and so I fork it and make my adjustments. So let's, I'll kind of jump into what that looks like. Let me, sorry, I'm gonna have to go back to a Dune. Yeah, perfect. All right, so here we are, you hit, so if you want us to make your own query, you go to new query, and it takes you to this Dune page. And so from here, you can select what chain you wanna work with. So if you wanna do something on Ethereum, you'd click on Ethereum. And then here, these are all of the data tables that they have. So these are all Aave. If you wanted to search for another protocol, all you have to do is type it in the search bar and it might come up. They don't cover every single contract, but we'll get to that later. But so here we have all these different data tables, and we can see, you know, the Aave Vault proxy is calling this function. And typically, if you're looking to build a table, you'll want to look for the event columns because that's usually when transactions actually happen. And you can pull down and you can see these are all the columns that exist within that table. So just to give an example, you just type that in here. Come on, there we go. You can hit run. I'm not sure if this will run. Oh, perfect, it did run. And so there I'm able to pull all the data from this data table here. From there, it's really easy to make a visualization. You just hit new visualization, choose what type of visualization you want, hit add, and it'll automatically make it, and then you can edit down here. So it's fairly simple. Dune does not do the hard part of having to understand a protocol and identify in the contracts what type of events are relevant to the data that you want to pull. So right, Dune's not going to tell you exactly if you're making a query from scratch. Dune's not going to tell you exactly how to do that or what data tables you need to pull from. You got to find that on your own. But Dune basically pulls the data for you and makes it much easier for you to figure that out and much easier to interact and read the actual data. So that's where the value of Dune really is for people looking to build dashboards. So another thing that I wanted to talk about was forking queries. So for example, you can, let's say we want to change something about this query here. We can just click right into there. We can see the entire query. Someone who is much better at SQL than me has written this beautiful query right here and created this visualization. And if we want to make some alterations to it, then we can go up here and hit fork. And so what that does is it takes us back to that editor, and from here we can now edit this query. So let's say hypothetically, I don't know, for some reason we want to multiply this number by 10 instead. We can just make that adjustment there and hit run. I have no idea if it's actually going to run. It might be. And so from there, it'll spit out kind of the new data, the new query, or the new data based on this new query, and then we can make new visualizations from it there. So perfect. See, we now have these TVLs times 10 for some reason. So there we go. And then new visualization. Let's make a bar chart. Perfect. There, we can see that right there. All right. I think that is roughly it. Oh, sorry. Last thing. Will Dune add a contract for me? So yes. So as I mentioned, Dune doesn't have every single contract available on Ethereum or on Polygon or whatever network you're looking to interact with, but you can submit a contract for them to cover. So all you do is you go to this URL. It's a dune.xyz/contract/new. You have this submit a contract for decoding. And so you'll put the chain, the contract address. I'm not going to do that because I don't have one off the top of my head. But what you will need is the contract ABI. Excuse me. And so what the contract ABI is let's say we go to this contract page on Etherscan. You can see here's the normal page, transactions, internal, ERC20. Then there's also this contract page where you can verify the code. So you see here's the code here, and here is the contract ABI. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to copy all of it, go back to the new contract page, and in the details section here, it'll ask for the ABI, and you paste it. And that is what allows you, or what allows Dune to turn those weird hex hashes into readable, data tables, human readable outputs. So that's really important. It's also important to note that not every contract on Etherscan goes through this verification process. So you won't be able to see the entire contract all the time. And sometimes they won't have public ABIs, which means Dune won't be able to use them. That's very rarely the case, particularly within things like DeFi. But it does happen, something to be aware of, that not everything that you want will be immediately available on Dune. All right, so perfect. I think I'm pretty much out of time, but I'm gonna have a quick look to see, I see there's Nathan and Ben are in the chat. I'm just gonna have a quick look to see if there's any specific questions to Dune. Let me have a look. Doesn't look like it for the time being, which is fine by me. So basically I'll upload this to the member platform. If you're watching it on the member platform, that means I was successful in completing that. I'll also provide some links to the dashboards that I used and the some of the resources, and I'll also provide some Dune specific resources. But hopefully that gave everyone a decent overview of not only what Dune is, but more importantly, like how to use it when making an investment. Like how does Dune Analytics sit within the investment process? And hopefully everyone found that very valuable. As always, on the member platform, in the Collective Shift Discord or community, if you have any more specific questions, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the other team members, and we'll be happy to provide any information or answer those questions to the best of our ability. And thank you for your time. I hope you find this helpful, and I will catch everyone soon. I have some more videos coming out this week, so get used to my face. We'll see everyone soon.